privacy. It's not the Open Meetings Act that requires that, but it's the privacy statute that does. That, to me, was the only one I found in that list that our legal counsel gave us that looked like it was clearly required by statute. The closest second place winner, I guess, would be employee issues, where there were possible concerns about defamation that legal counsel cited as being good reasons to hold a closed session. For what it's worth, I don't read that as mandating a closed session. I read that as highly advisable to have it in closed session. The rest of the exemptions that legal counsel went through all went into the category of good business practices, and those included things like leases of property or purchases of property, collective bargaining negotiations, etc. So to me, at least, the bottom line of having legal counsel look at this is there is at least one subject matter that we are pretty well required to conduct in closed session. The rest of it goes in the category of advisable but not legally mandated. Don't know if that helps. And then, of course, the next question is, so what do you do with the sentence?
Exactly.
And, I'll agree with you, the sentence isn't particularly artful. My sense was that the retreat it was put in, it kind of represented a compromise by some board members who definitely wanted to say something about this and other board members who wanted to make sure that they were not being bound to respect something that wasn't required to be conducted in closed session. So I guess with all that history, think about whether you want to propose that we make a change there or not. In the meantime, actually take you off the hook for a second, Dr. Borelli. I'll ask if any other board members have other changes they'd like to make. And then I'll promise to come back to that one. Any other changes anybody wants to make? All right, I only bought you 15 seconds.
That's all I needed.
All right.
Actually, I'm not an attorney, but when I read this, based on the way that it is, based on what you just said, according to the statute, any student issues should go into closed session.
Mm-hmm.
And information required by statute, therefore, would be student issues, to be discussed in closed session and so discussed will remain confidential. Now, the way I read this sentence is, anything that's discussed in closed session about student issues shall not be discussed.
I think that's probably a fair reading of what that sentence says.
Should not be disclosed.
Disclosed, yes.
Will remain confidential.
Yeah.
You said will not be discussed, will not be disclosed.
Right.
Yeah.
Remain confidential.
Right.
I'll use the wording right here.
Yeah.
And if that's the reading of the issue, then I'm good with it.
Okay. I guess the other thing I would say about closed session confidentiality, it does not appear in the operating principles, and thus nobody is required to vote on my view of this or necessarily agree with it. I think in general it's a good practice as a board that if we have decided that something ought to be discussed in closed session, that in general we should respect the things about the closed session that caused us to close it. An example that I know will come up soon is collective bargaining negotiations that we are not required to do in closed session, but certainly when we get there, I'll recommend that the board strategize about our collective bargaining negotiations in closed session. I'll recommend that for the same reason that if I'm buying a house, I don't discuss with my wife what we're willing to pay in front of the seller. The board strategizing ought to be done in private so that we maximize our ability to drive a good bargain. And likewise, I expect that the Teachers Association will not include us as they strategize for the contract. There's certainly nothing legally required about that. There's certainly no legal bar on a board member releasing that information. My strong recommendation to board members would be we will be a stronger board, a more effective board. We will drive a better bargain in the contract if we all respect the confidentiality. And I would make the same argument for anything else we choose to close. So I'll just offer that as a comment, but it's not in these operating principles. Any other comments or questions or suggested changes on the operating principles? public comment on the operating principles?
John, while you're on the topic of the closed session, when I look at the future meetings, I think it would inspire great public confidence if, I don't think the public is certainly demanding to be part of the closed session, but to say simply, closed session on this date, what is the general reason?
Yep.
Is it to a student issue? Is it to talk about collective bargaining? That way we're,
Well, like Charlene, you've anticipated something I have under other items of information, so I will get that directly out of, did we just lose our microphone?
Yeah.
yours.
I don't know what happened to her.
No,
We're all
we're
on.
hearing. We heard Scott's. We heard that.
Everything's on.
If I
It's
may.
intermittent.
Gotta pound it hard.
Apologies to you two listeners with headphones. Marcia, I guess to respond to your comment about the upcoming closed session in particular, and that I was going to cover. Actually, let me back up and just say generally, I think in listening to some of these discussions, it's become apparent to me that one of the things that we need to do, and I will try to do this during other items of information every meeting, is to kind of look at the next few meetings ahead and say, where, kind of what's going on, where we have committees in the whole, what do we plan to talk about. That kind of came up, nicely in the budget discussion and the question of, well, when will the public have an opportunity to comment on the budget? It also comes up in terms of this closed session. And this closed session that we have tentatively scheduled for September 12th, and this will be new to board members because this is 19th, excuse me, that we have scheduled for September 19th, and this will be new to board members as it is an additional meeting. This is proposed as a closed session to be the first session that we discuss the upcoming negotiation of the contract with the Teachers Association. So this will be the first of what probably will be several meetings to discuss strategy for that negotiation and to discuss what the board's opening positions and ultimately bottom lines ought to be on the contract negotiation. So that is the answer for this particular closed session.
Thank you.
Any other public comments on the operating principles? If not, I would take a motion to adopt operating principles.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, adopt the Board of Education operating principles that were reaffirmed on July 30th, 2011.
Okay, moved by Mr. Ulick. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Collins. Any further discussion? If not, we'll proceed to a vote. Dr. Borelli?
Yes. Aye.
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 Sharon?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion is approved. And next up is the consent agenda. May I have a motion, please?
Sure. I move that the Board of Education, Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, approve the consent agenda of August 22nd, 2011, which includes the personnel report, bills, approval of financial update for the period ending July 31st, 2011, approval of policy issue 75, February 2011, approval of intergovernmental agreement between the governing board of the Niles Township District for Special Education 807 and the Board of Education of Park Ridge Community Consolidated School District 64 for the provision of certain special education services and destruction of audio closed minutes, of which there are none.
Moved by Mr. Zimmerman. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Fioretto. Any discussion or questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
In the summary of investments that was included in this, total yield is 2.1% for the total investments. However, there's some funds held at Chase invested at 0.5% and funds held at NB Financial invested at 0.3%. This is short-term. Becky here? These are short-term investments.
It's a money market.
Yeah.
Right.
My
Liquid.
question is, why aren't they all in Chase at the 0.5? Why would we invest invest at a lower rate at 0.3, unless we have just waiting for that money market to CD to come due and then we can flip it.
Sometimes the township treasurer gets concerned about the amount of money in a single bank. And so even though it's a lower rate, they do split the money between the two.
Obviously, this is more than $250,000, so is any of this guaranteed FDIC?
Up to the $250,000 limit.
So do they have multiple $250,000 accounts, or
No,
all one account?
It's all one account, to the
Would it
best of
be-
my knowledge.
Would it be more advisable to have multiple accounts, each one with $250,000?
That is certainly something that we can take back to the township treasurer. But again, the discretion of the investment practices are at the township treasurer's discretion, so.
Well, I realize that, but I'm just thinking financial security-wise.
We have raised that concern with him, that there's no collateral on those investments above and beyond that.
Right. Okay.
If you would like me to carry that message, I would be glad to do that.
Well, I think that message needs to come from the board, but yeah, I'd like it to get to them.
Pretty sure there's ways that you can insure or guarantee the amounts that you have on deposit, at least up to $1 million, if not more.
There are ways to buy insurance to collateralize those investments in a money market account. That's just not their practice.
And I do recall, Ms. Howard, that board members have expressed that concern in the past. In fact, Ms. Lawson is nicely holding her tongue on the phone. I know this is an
I
issue
should ask
that
if
is
she's still there.
near and dear to her heart as well. So I'm sure if you were to tell the township treasurer at least that you have board members who find that practice to be concerning, you would be quite accurate.
I will take care of that.
Any other questions or discussion on the consent agenda? Any public comment on the?
Don,
Oh, yes, go ahead, Sharon.
beyond just getting collateral, there are other ways that the money can be placed so that it is all insured. And I don't know if the township has looked into that or not, but there are at least 2 programs out there where you can place the money amongst an array of financial institutions, each which would give you insurance on your deposits. And you might even be able to get a better price. So there are things for them to be looking into. It would cause them more bookkeeping headaches, but it might, from a safety standpoint and a return standpoint, it might be better to have our funds invested that way.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon, that's helpful. And you can't see, but Becky is nodding as she talks.
She knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
I do.
Okay, any further discussion of the consent agenda? Okay, if not, we have a motion on the table, and I believe we're ready to vote, and we are on, I think, Mr. Collins' side to start.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Sharon?
Yes.
Okay, motion approved. Next up is approval of minutes. May I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, approve the special board meeting minutes of August 8th, 2011, and committee of the whole minutes of August 8th, 2011.